Hello, class, and welcome to our first lesson, Attempting Definitions, Magic, Science, and Religion. Now, just to give you a brief idea of how this is going to work, we will have these PowerPoint presentations for the lessons. I am not going to read the PowerPoints to you. I will explain some relevant things about them, point out other things to consider or other tangential issues. But honestly, you're in college, you know how to read. So you also know how to use technology probably better than I do. So you know how to back up, you know how to pause, you know how to take notes from a presentation. So if these things go a bit fast, just stop or, pause just like you would when you're going to get a snack or something. So let's get started with the first lesson. Now, defining science. This is a lot, I know. And some of you have already been to science classes where this has been covered, in detail. Basically, we know science because we have lifespans that are just long enough that we can watch some of the changes going on the earth. We can just see things being washed away by water. We can just see little things that change even in a 100-year lifespan. So we can see nature working around us. It gives us an idea that we can actually start to predict how things work. You can see patterns that can often be described mathematically, and that's your gold standard when you can predict something mathematically. Specific techniques, organization, apparatus, you know this. And one little word, I have here laws in parentheses. Why? Well, as some of you know, modern science doesn't like talking about laws. It prefers to talk about hypotheses or theories. Nothing's really ever a law, but, from the 1600s, we got stuck with the ideas. So, key element, and we're going to see it over and over again in the class, always default to natural explanations if possible. This is a key element in science. When you have an unexplained phenomenon, an unexplained object, you can either go straight to the overboard explanation or you can have the prosaic natural one. We're going to see quite a few examples of this. In science, you want to go for the prosaic one. If it's a difficult explanation, actually that's kind of good. It means that you have something you yet need to understand. Yeah, supernatural explanations, often too easy and short-circuit science. Now, like I have at the bottom, this is all a Western definition of science, but science is a Western construct. That's key. In this class, the fact is we're dealing with Western definitions of these things because that's what we're stuck with. Of course, a scientific method, some of you know this well, you know this. Make a hypothesis, must be falsifiable. That means you must be able to show how your theory can be proven wrong, or I should say your hypothesis. If you come up with an hypothesis and it's impossible to prove it wrong, we actually have a problem. Predictions is a logical consequence, design experiment, do observations. Now, of course, a scientific method isn't always great when you're talking about things like archaeology, when you're talking about what you're finding and you're having to come up with explanations around what you find, but it's still a good beginning point. Logic is the beginning of knowledge, not its end. So, falsification is often more revealing. You know this from your lives. Often, when you fail in a task, you learn more than if you had succeeded. At least in failure, you figured out what you did wrong, what will work better next time. Magic, how to define it? Good luck. The further we get away from science, and we can debate how to define science, honestly, the fuzzier things get. What is magic? Now you can see. Subjects and objects can influence one another. That's probably one of the most common definitions. Rituals and ceremonies in a social contexts, altering the natural world according to your will. Now, more importantly, it's often a derogatory term. When someone doesn't like something, they call it magic. This happened a lot in the Reformation. Protestants like to say that Catholicism was a bunch of magic because they had rituals and they had liturgies and there was a transubstantiation that occurred. Especially in religion, magic tends to be a term of abuse, like occult, and we'll see that as well. Magic, as opposed to religion, very difficult to define because they have such fuzzy boundaries between them. In general, the idea that you want Other agents, usually supernatural, but doesn't have to be, to do your will or to do something that benefits you, tends to roughly be how magic gets defined. So yes, even praying to get a new job, that's magic. And religion, here we go, good luck. Religious studies is my main field, and no one's completely figured it out yet because religion involves every part of the human mind, brain. Definitions usually are set by the official religious authorities, and that's a key element. We're going to see that a little bit throughout the course. This is really covered more in my witchcraft and heresy course. But the fact is, defining religion, defining churches, defining dogma tend to be done by authorities, authorities who have a reason to want to define them. They want to control you. They want to control every aspect of your life, so they start defining your life and your beliefs and your actions. Also scholars, because we study something, and in order to study it, we need to define what it is. Not necessarily as sinister, but still, you get the idea. Defining religion is incredibly difficult. And that last part, or the middle part, I should say, Western Protestants create the current categories. Yeah, primarily Anglicans, Anglicans, Methodists, some Presbyterian scholars. It's really the Protestants who have created these categories, and they did so beginning in the really the 1700s when religious studies started to come out as a way to delegitimize others, to claim why Catholics aren't real Christians or why Muslims aren't a real religion, or you get the idea. We're going to see a lot of that in this course, that there's quite an agenda that shows up in a lot of these things that we're going to study. Things that are in the background that you may not have thought of. So religious categories, they're not really that useful when you think about it. What's a Christian? Well, if I ask a Southern Baptist, they're going to tell me it's not a Catholic. If I ask an Orthodox, they're going to say it's not a Protestant. You get the idea. Buddhists don't always say that they're Buddhists together. A Mahayana Buddhist won't necessarily recognize a Theravada, neither of them will recognize an Amida. Welcome to religious studies. So we tend to look at lived religions better. How are people actually acting? What are they actually doing? Because I'll give you a hint. Asking a minister, a priest, a monk, what is a religion, how it's defined, it's about the worst way. The only thing worse is reading a holy book. Reading the Bible is terrible for determining what a Christian is because Christians don't follow it. And they'll give you all sorts of reasons and mental gymnastics on why they don't have to follow it, but yet it's holy and they love it. Religious categories are difficult at best. So we get to what we can boil down this whole thing to. Humans are religious, whatever in the world that is. No human culture that we've ever been able to determine has ever arisen without religion that we can see. Something's going on in the human mind brain that makes this happen. It's a human activity. In all religions, death and corpses are going to be important. Sex and gender are always important. Strong emotions. And humans love to anthropomorphize the world. They love to see what's going on in the cosmos around them as almost like they're human actors, although they'll call them superhuman or something. They always seem to be the same as the people. So the common thread, basically religion's created by humans, but guess what? So is magic. And bad news, science. Now, it is true that probably the universal language all species, all intelligent species would understand is mathematics. That's probably the only language that would translate across species. Everything else, the construct of science, religion, magic, culture, music, those are all very much bound to particular species, and within species, particular cultures within species. So these are all humans. So what is religious and what isn't religious? Well, nothing. Everything you can think of is religious in some culture at some time. That includes science, that includes magic. So in this course, we're dealing with honestly some incredibly fuzzy definitions. And if you are unable to tell them apart with great precision, there's a reason. So critical concepts, religion, the most complex operation which human mind brains engage. Religion is part of everything. Everything in your brain seems to go into it. All inference systems, all human activities are considered religious in some religion somewhere. And we're going to see that throughout the course. Now, what I'd like to do is, in this lesson, go over a few of the major religious theorists, just the really big ones that have had a huge effect. I don't say that necessarily religious studies people agree with them, but in a way, I want to introduce this because it's so incredibly muddy. I want to give you an idea of what we're dealing with. Science is in way easier. We can explain what Einstein had to say and you get it. Some of what you're about to see is possibly going to make you bleed from both ears. Again, I'm not going to read these whole things to you. You know how to pause. But the first man considered a theorist in religious studies, Friedrich Schleiermacher, comes out of the Holy Roman Empire, late 17, early 1800s. What is he trying to tell us? He's trying to figure out for the very first time what is religious studies, what is religion? And he's having to deal with a world where everyone knows what theology is. It's the right way to pray, basically. But what is religion generally? And that's what he's grappling with. You can see some of his ideas. Religion is a feeling or an intuition, contact with the infinite. Believe it or not, I'm boiling this down for you. Schleiermacher's writings are interesting as anything. But he's really grappling with this concept. What is religion? He says infinite instead of a God. He's really trying to get to the concept that there's something outside of humanity. He does, however, tell us, in his opinion, dogmas, deities, afterlives are all derivative. So if you're really looking for Jesus, that's a secondary creation. If you're looking for the Bible, if you're looking for church law, if you're looking for karma, those are all things made up by humans. So to him, there's actually real religion, and everyone can access it, but the religions aren't quite it. Well, you can see his weaknesses. He sees faith as the center of religion, and that's a very Protestant way of thinking today. But hey, he's the first. He's trying. Tyler and Fraser, in some ways, are some of the still most quoted of the theorists. They come in, they're British, and they have a very, very British way of looking at things. And this is going to actually get us into another issue that we'll be seeing more and more of. Notice religion evolves. That's a key element. And notice that magic is always part of how it evolves. So Tyler, the man of the left, set patterns in society. You can actually categorize a society by where it is along this continuum of animal magic mythology. Fraser, the man on the right, comes a little later, says magic's the source of all religion. And it's individual people who will alter it. Apparently, once a Jesus or a Moses come along and they change religion, or a Joseph Smith, no one bothers changing it for another 500 years until someone else does it. This is what's called a strict evolutionist view, that things evolve in set patterns, in set stages, almost at set times. Intellectualism, set intellects, change religion. These two, however, just to give you a little background, we're talking about Englishmen, and at heart, they tend to believe that monotheism, specifically the Church of England, is the superior religion. Notice monotheism's at the top of Tyler's list. This is something we're going to see again and again. This idea that there is a path of evolution and there is a top. And in all the magic, science, religion we're going to see in this course, there's always going to be, interestingly, hovering around somewhere this idea that there are superiors and inferiors. And wow, Tyler and Fraser just happen to be on the superior scale. They're white men in England who are Anglican, believing in one God, probably a white God for all we really know. Their theories still bounce around a lot. People like Tyler and Fraser when they like to think that religion is nothing but a bunch of hocus pocus. You knew we had to bring him in. Sigmund Freud, our favorite. What does Freud have to say? Well, he talks about everything. And you know, if you've been to psychology, if you've been to literary criticism, if you've been to almost any class in college, you went into Freud. You can see it. It's Freud. Irrational superstition, repression of sex drive, obsessional neuroses. It's Freud. It had to happen. God delusion, wish fulfillment. According to Freud, religion is about that close to being a mental illness. He never actually says it is. But there are things that are really forcing you to believe in religion. If you had a healthy psyche, you probably wouldn't, is what his writings seem to imply. And yeah, in his one of his last major works, Moses and Monotheism, he proposes that the Hebrew and later Christian gods are literally Moses' father, whom he murdered in Egypt because he wanted to have sex with his mother. And then he was so guilty about it that he elevated his father into a god, and we're all worshiping Moses' dead father today as God. And then all of us, in a way, tend to do something similar. It's Freud, though, you know. Electra complex, Oedipus complex. All men want to get jiggy with mom. All girls want to get jiggy with dad. Sure. Well, you can see it's Freud uses a lot of circular reasoning. And he tends to only be familiar with what are called theistic religions. He's Jewish, but he lives in Vienna, and he seems to be usually reacting against Christianity, specifically organized Christianity. Emile Durkheim, in a way, we're finally starting to get someone who takes a scientific view of things. He's French, he's a sociologist, and he gives us ideas that we still reckon with today. Morality comes from society. That is to say, in Durkheim, the morality that people claim are eternal truths that come out of religion, Durkheim says no, they are the truths of your society. Your morals change. And he did this by examining in particular, he was reading reports of Aboriginal societies in Australia. And he noticed that they had different assumptions about the world, different moralities. And it got him to really do some research, do some thinking. That's one of his major ideas. Morality changes depending on the culture you're in. To put it another way, if you're a Christian in the United States of America, let's say Arizona, it's different from a Christian who was in New York City in 1745. There's actually going to be a different Christianity at work, and you're going to be dealing with somewhat different people with different assumptions. And both are going to be different from a Christian in 20th century, 1911 Germany. Why? Different societies that have different assumptions. Their moralities are going to be a little different because the societies are coming out of. And that very much what we're dealing with religion. You can't have religion outside society. You drop Tarzan in the jungle, and his religion at best is going to revolve around cheetah. Religion and society are inexorably linked. You can see another idea, worship of a god or a totem, as he calls it, basically worshiping society. When you worship, if you're an American Christian and you're worshiping God and Jesus, you're basically worshiping the flag, and you're worshiping Americanness and capitalism. And he would say this is true because if you go to France and you're worshiping God there, you tend to be worshiping Frenchness and French culture and the God of French Catholicism, and they're actually different. So Durkheim gives us a lot of interesting things to think about. Karl Marx, why should we deal with him? Well, because Marx, believe it or not, gives you a lot of interesting things to chew on, even if you don't like socialism, communism, and all that. Marx still was actually a very canny observer of things. He's been looking at organized religion in Europe, specifically churches that are institutional churches. Hence, he comes up with the idea, an illusion created by the oppressors to keep the working classes docile. Now, that sounds very class-based, and of course it is. But his basic idea behind it is that organized religion exists for reasons of power. That's it. Priests, preachers, organized churches. There's more power and money involved than just spirituality. There's control of people. That's not a bad way to think of things, because any even small Baptist churches you think of, there's still going to be this idea of the preacher tells you how to live your life. Then he gets up there and tells you why you should vote for a candidate he likes and why women aren't allowed to say the same thing. You get the idea. So Marx really is going to take aim at organized religion and power that it wields, in which case he's extremely valuable. Of course, he bases his theories on organized Christianity. He's not trying to take on all of religion. He's actually not that interested. And I just put this up here because one of the things that people all love to do is misquote Marx. Of course, we misquote everything. Religion's the opiate of the masses, meaning religion's illegitimate. Well, here's his full quote. And if you read it for a minute, you'll see that he's not actually saying religion's illegitimate. What he's saying is it's like opium. When you are legitimately feeling bad, opium will actually make you feel good for a while. It won't fix your problem. In today's opiate epidemic world, this actually takes on new meaning. Sure, the Oxycontin will make you feel good for a few hours and you'll forget all your troubles. Then it'll wear off and you got to go back to work and deal with all your troubles again. For Marx, that's kind of religion. Makes you forget about your lousy life for a while. Carl Jung, man who initially was a disciple of Freud but broke away, he takes a more mystical view. Human psyche is fundamentally religious. Jung's probably, I would say, one of the first ones to say, you know what, religion is something that just arises from the human mind brain. It's part of who we are. It naturally comes out of this mind brain construct that we have. He believes spirituality is necessary. He believes humans are created to have the experience of God. Now, he will never actually say God exists, but he won't deny it either. He's not sure what it is. He's more on the agnostic scale on that front. And you can see the heart of all religions is individuation. He believes that all religions use symbolism that's very similar to each other. Okay, you can see some weaknesses, theories of race identity, race memories. We're actually going to cover some of that. But still, Jung gives us this idea that religion is just natural in humans. It arises on its own. In that case, he kind of agrees with Emil Durkheim, although Durkheim seems to come from the approach that society puts religion on you. Jung says it tends to come from within you, and then it adapts to the society around you. Mircea Eliade, he sort of follows in the footsteps of Jung and refines things, believes that modern cultures are less truly religious than what he calls primitive cultures. Americans, in a way, are less spiritual than people who are living close to the land. So urban dwellers, not as much as rural people. Americans, not so much as people who live, say, in indigenous communities around the world. He talks a lot about symbols, although he never really defines them very well. Everyone wants to abolish time, get back to beginning when everything was perfect, sort of a return to the womb in a way, return to Eden. He is a very popular theorist, and you still just find his theories around. He had kind of a hit that fell after he died when it turned out some of his ideas might have been influenced by some useful associations he had with pro-Nazi groups in Romania before the Second World War. I don't know how far to push those, to be perfectly honest, but to be fair, you still find Eliade's theories used a lot, and there are people who have really contested those. Edward E. Evans Pritchard, honestly one of my favorites. He is an ethnographer, he is an anthropologist, a cultural anthropologist, never formulates a theory of religion, but he starts to do work specifically in North Africa, which is today South Sudan. And he's looking at peoples, and what he comes up with is that these theories about religion are horse hockey. You're trying to make these sweeping generalizations about religion like you can explain every single religion with these theories, and he says it doesn't work. Once you get into the details of any given culture, these grand theories break down. Another interesting aspect, as you can see, Westerners tend to assume everyone chooses religion rationally. That's actually quite interesting. Over 90% of all people on planet Earth follow the religion of their parents. They just inherited it. Now, I've been told, I know, in America, we don't do that. We choose our churches. Well, not completely. And what I mean by that is, usually I get that argument from somebody who's going to a Pentecostal church who was raised Methodist. Theologically, you're barely any different. Or you're in a Southern Baptist church, but you used to be Presbyterian. You really haven't changed it. Now, if you were raised Southern Baptist and you're now Buddhist, you're right. Then you fit within that less than 10% who change your religion. Yeah, most people get their religion from their parents and just inherit it and follow it and think it's right because they were taught it. So Evans Pritchard says we need to back off this idea that somehow religion is a rational activity. He also comes up with the idea that everyone knows the difference between science and religion, even if they can't really enunciate it. His work among North African groups basically what he saw was people understood that you could make fire and you did it. Maybe the gods or the spirits control the fire, but at the end of the day, they were smart enough to understand, stone, spark, I did it. They may believe in things like witchcraft and that you have to appeal to the spirits for help with health issues, for example, but they get the difference. So Evans Pritchard sort of puts up to bed this idea that their so-called primitive peoples are less intelligent than the so-called advanced ones. It's all bogus. People are people. So, context. Everything is context. Religion, magic, science, even witchcraft, culturally bound constructs, they differ from culture to culture. You won't understand them well unless you look at the context. This is huge, honestly. In this sense, that's why I consider Evans Pritchard one of my favorites, and I consider him one of the most important. And you're free to disagree with me. He gives us a valuable warning. Totalizing theories, those general theories that explain everything, put the brakes on. Clifford Geertz sort of follows in the footsteps of Evans Pritchard. You see, he only died recently. He sees religion as a cultural system with what are called symbols. Now, he defines symbols. Symbols aren't necessarily things like a cross or an X or anything like that. He thinks of symbols as the concept of liberty, the concept of freedom, the concept of salvation, the concept of God. These ideas, the concept of love, these are all symbols, and they differ by culture. Each culture has different ones, and Geertz says each generation basically has to redefine them for themselves. So we're kind of going back, you see, to other ideas we've already seen, where you need to take a look at different cultures, like, again, Durkheim, and realize that these things are changing. These are ever-changing symbolic systems, and they reinforce worldviews. They reinforce an ethos. So you're American because you accept the concept of liberty. You accept that voting is good, even though you've seen people and what they vote for. You accept this because this is a symbol. We've all agreed on it, at least mostly, but it's not the same one we had in the 1950s. Now, one thing he warns about, and he does his work mainly with Muslim cultures. He studies them primarily in Morocco and Indonesia, so two radically different areas. And of course, one of the first things he sees is that just because they're both Muslim, actually, in a way, they're totally different religions and cultures. I mean, they fit into that giant umbrella, but that's about it. Now, here's this unpronounceable word, ideologization. I don't know why he made it up. Extreme textualism. Basically, he noticed in the Islamic world that people who were insisting you go by the literal text of the Quran, every little letter, was driving people away. He said it's not science, it's not evolution, it's not the Big Bang making them lose faith in religion. It's the people running the religions who insist you must believe in this stuff literally, when anyone with half a brain can see that it's not literal, it's not reality. Of course, you can transplant that to Christianity and the United States, and you can see exactly what he's talking about. People insisting you interpret the Bible literally. God means you take this to be exactly what this word says, and you're looking around going, yeah, that doesn't fit like reality. So people fall away. Okay. And here's a great quote from Geertz talking about symbols. Please take a minute and take a look at it. And Jonathan Z. Smith, another fun one. And I love this picture. He looks like such a sort of post-hippie rake, doesn't he? Jonathan Z. Smith is another one who's going to give us a corrective. Religion is a creation of scholars and theologians. What does that mean? There's never been religion? Well, no. He goes into history, and it's something true enough. And it happens generally. People don't define what they believe or what they think they are until they're challenged. Someone walks in and says, I'm a Christian. You say, okay, what's that mean? And they might have to think a second before they give you the obvious answer. Well, I love Jesus, or something like that. Well, you start pushing them. And generally what's happening is, it's not that they're stupid if they stop and pause, it's that they've never actually thought about it. Most people don't in any religion or culture. It's when you're challenged that you start to define things. Historically, for example, Western culture has defined itself as non-Islamic. Islamic cultures defined itself as non-Western, that is non-Christian. These two cultures, I think of the siblings because they spent over 1,000 years fighting each other and deliberately defining each other as not the other. Well, that's actually something that happens in human cultures all the time, and humans have to do. One of the first things you did in your life was to find yourself as not mom, that individuation. And some of you who know child psychology know exactly what I'm talking about. One of the most important parts of a child's life is when they actually comprehend I. And further, that you cannot hear their thoughts and they cannot hear yours. So religious groups that define themselves in opposition to others, therefore, in a way, religion is something created by theologians and scholars, those studying it or who want to control it and who give it these boundaries and say, this is the pigeonhole you must fit into. People don't fit well into pigeonholes. Any of you who know queer theory know exactly what that means. Making these pigeonholes is cute, but it's really more of a dominance play than it is often an accurate depiction of what's going on. Teofilo Ruiz comes out of Cuba, works in America. He doesn't intend to come up with a theory of religion, but in his work, he works in history. He unintentionally does, and it comes out of his readings mainly of the Middle Ages. So, what do we start with Ruiz? Existence is meaningless and purposeless. I like this already. So you need a way to cope. This is almost getting to Nietzsche, where the Übermensch, the Superman, is able to construct a meaning of life, even though he realizes that life has no meaning or purpose. According to Ruiz, religion is one of three ways humans cope with what he calls the terror of history. And you can see the other two are hedonism and aesthetics. Basically, in his view, there are three ways to deal with it. Life sucks. You're going to die. There's nothing else. There's no meaning to your life. You arose accidentally. You're going to die and snuff it. No one's going to remember you. How do you deal with this? Well, you can flee to religion, in which you choose to believe that there's something up there that is in control, that somehow gives meaning to this whole meaningless exercise we call life. Or you can go to hedonism, where you just say, stuff it all. I'm going to go out and party and get laid and get drunk, and I'm going to just smash things, and I'm going to have a fun, and it's going to be Clockwork Orange on steroids. Then there's ascetics, which technically I would fit into. This is where you're looking for meaning in scholarship and understanding history, understanding art, in music and making beautiful things like art and music and writing. You're constructing worlds. We're actually going to see some of that, incidentally, constructing worlds. Now, granted, Ruiz tends to see humans as choosing religion rationally, but still, he has some very interesting ideas. And Pascal Boyer, he's a neuroscientist, and he does a lot of his work in the brain. Basically, he thinks religion is an outgrowth of the human mind brain. The brain has evolved certain systems to avoid predators, to avoid contagion. These are systems your brain can't turn off because your brain can't turn them on. They've been on since before you came out of mommy's tummy. They're only going to stop when you die. And since you can't control them, you really can't control when they engage. Great example would be you're lying in bed at night, it's dark, you're alone in the house, and you hear something crash in the kitchen. Your first thought is, who did it? Well, that's actually a normal function of your brain. It's not you being necessarily paranoid. It's a predator protection system where you're trying to make sure you're not being hunted, even though it may just be the wind, or you just put something on the counter kind of lazily. So religion, an accidental byproduct of intelligence. And in a way, religion as a category doesn't exist. It's just a confluence of a lot of functions, a lot of inference systems in your mind brain. Well, it's an interesting point of view. I think elements of it definitely need to be considered. But he's not trying to come up with an overall theory of religion that would be, if you will, spiritually satisfying. In fact, he tends to see those as kind of secondary and not particularly important. But still, reading his research is fascinating. Oh, one thing, his popular book on religion is called Religion Explained. So you can tell where he thinks he's taken his research. So we've taken a look at this. How does religion begin? What is the first religion? Fair question as we're going to go forward. We first see something, and I emphasize something vaguely, Rising Star Cave, a species called Homo naledi. After their deaths, these hominids are placed in a cave system. Does this indicate religion? No clue. But it seems that these corpses have been deliberately placed in these caves. That could indicate religion, could indicate an afterlife, could be just we don't want these things stinking up the living area. No other material left with them. We have no grave goods, for instance. We have nothing left with them to indicate what's going on here. And the way that these remains were found, as you see, they could have landed. It's possible they could have fallen down and just crumpled up in those positions. It's not like they were necessarily laid out nicely. Hard to say if we have religion in this species, but 230,000 BCE, it's going back a ways. Krapina, earliest undisputed deliberate burial of the dead. It's Homo neanderthalensis, our friend Neanderthal man, 130,000 BCE. Secondary burial seems to be involved. Were they defleshed, which is to say they die, we put them somewhere so that we can get all the flesh off their bones, then we bury the bones. Were they eaten? Is this just a way of sending them to the afterlife? Does this indicate an afterlife? Is this some sort of practical, again, we're just taking off the flesh so it doesn't stink everything up? Really don't know. We begin to get better information with this, the symbolic revolution. You can see it takes a long time, 100,000 to 50,000 BCE roughly. We begin to see, honestly, very impractical things showing up. We tend to call it art, even though it's a recent construct. The idea of looking at art for pleasure is very recent. We get cave paintings. We get decorative objects. Something's happening. Homo sapiens, our species, archaic Homo sapiens in particular, seem to be able to externalize thought. We get symbols showing up, abstract designs that show up. Can't tell you what it means. Assuming it has a meaning, we think it might. It would seem to. I mean, you spend a lot of time working on it. But you can see, we think it's abstract ideas being communicated. Shell ornaments, polished stone awls, but a lot of geometric design. So someone's taking the time to make hatch marks. They're making squares and squares and squares, circles that link with circles. We never saw this before. What does it mean? This is also the time when studies of human DNA indicate that possibly we get the rise of spoken language. So spoken language, we know this, and if you've studied symbolic interaction, you understand the concept. Symbolic representation in particular, associating science to the physical world. I mean, how do I indicate to you that I have, a pair of glasses? Well, I can mention the word glasses. It's a sound that we all have agreed means glasses. Or I can hold up the pair and just sort of shake it in your face. I can say I'm hungry, in which case you know what I mean, or I can point to my belly and One's easier than the other. It seems to come from a mutation in a particular gene, as you can see, the FOXP2. We know it's associated with spoken language. Did this cause spoken language? Well, that's not clear. That's going a little too far. We can't prove that, but they're definitely linked. And it seems to come about the same time we get this complexity going on. But we do get a lot of symbols popping up. Very likely sounds. We know in time sounds arise because, well, language exists. With spoken language, you can start to discuss abstracts. I mean, things that aren't concrete. How do you express love without language? It gets difficult because it's really an abstract. You can express partnership maybe, or you help me dig up rock, but I love you and I don't want you to leave me. That gets harder. The future, that's almost impossible. You get the idea. Only humans have this quality. Of course, only humans have the FOXP2 gene. Even bonobos, our closest genetic relatives, they don't have the right FOXP2 gene. You can see 2 amino acids are different, and therefore they cannot speak the way we can. We can see in the humans the brain case is getting larger. We can tell that the brains have been evolving for a while. And that, of course, you can have fun if you're in the anthropology department having discussions over the chicken and the egg argument. Did the brain increase first, allowing for this abstraction, this language to come about? Or did the brain have to react afterward? And you can probably have a good fight with each other with boxing gloves over this. It's a complicated question. At the moment, there's really no good answer. Fun to look at, great to debate, and fascinating to study. But if you're looking for answers, I can't give them to you. Other effects. With the appearance of language, we seem to get self-awareness. This is intriguing. Consciousness, possibly. Now, defining these things gets really fuzzy. Self-awareness is easy in a way. It's easier than consciousness. Self-awareness, you actually understand you are a being that has feelings. You have needs type of thing. Consciousness, where you seem to have, I mean, it's hard for me to even conceptualize this, but consciousness, you have an inner monologue, you have thoughts, you actually can ponder things, you have, it even ties into voluntary recall and memories, and you can conceive of concepts like, what if I did not exist? And because I'm here, all of this may date from this time. It's difficult to say for sure. There was a theory in the late 80s that consciousness has only been around since the 5th century BCE. I think that's mostly been discarded. Possibly the realization of death may appear. Counterfactual thinking seems to appear, which could indicate beliefs in life after death, the invisible dead. All of this seems to more or less arise around this time, even if we can't completely define it. So our conclusion, religion, part of being human, whatever in the world it is. We're going to be looking at a lot of this more in the following lessons. Magic, science, same thing. And I know science is something we comfortingly, like I said, like to think of as set in stone. Sorry, no. If you're looking for things to be the same and never change, science is not what you want. That's almost theology, where someone can sit there and tell you, I have determined that this is what God's like and he'll never change. And as long as that person sitting there doesn't change their mind, it doesn't change. Religious studies, how humans employ religion, including magic, studies mechanics, origins, and logic of religious rituals. So we will be looking at religious studies in this class, but we'll also be looking at science as well. We're not interested in the existence or non-existence of supernatural beings. And I think that's important to point out, because we're going to be engaging a question like that. Why people believe what they believe, how they come up with this, and how they express these beliefs. We're not interested in whether or not a God is there, what she's like, or how many of them she can be. We're looking at this much more objectively. So, a bit of skepticism to bring in here before we go. Fact versus truth. Ancient and medieval people don't get obsessed with facts. Why? Fact isn't the truth. Behind me is a tapestry. So what? That's a fact. There's no great truth in it. We tend to confuse facts with truth. We're obsessed with proving things. We need a fact to prove that it's true. You get into older literature, you get to the ancient medieval world, they're not interested in proving things like that. They assume that these things are true, even if the facts don't line up. And yes, I'm sorry, that includes the Bible. The modern fetish for claiming the Bible is literally true in every particular, you can actually disprove that very easily. But that didn't bother the ancients, because they believed it was true, even if you couldn't prove it as a fact. So first thing we're going to have to encounter in this course, the fact that literal mindedness tends to get us in a lot of trouble, not just you and me. Some of the people are going to be seeing in this course. So, is religion a lie? Well, is anything a lie? Like I have here. Do you really need that question? And what I mean by that is you go and see a movie like, Steel Magnolias, and you love it because why? It tells you the truth about the relationships between people, particularly about women in a small southern town. And yet none of that actually ever happened. Therefore, the movie's a lie. You should burn all copies and hunt down every actor who made it and shoot them. That's stupid. you can gain a lot of truth from things that are not factual. That's how humans learn. We learn through story. Through story, we learn truth. Facts, facts get in the way of a good story. Sorry, you got to keep that in mind. That's why politics tends to function the way it does. Facts, they're fuzzy. Maybe, maybe not. Let's go for the story. People like the story and the yelling. Ooh, they love the yelling and the torchlight parades. So it's not a matter of religion being true or a lie. It's a matter of how you tell the story, and the story is everything. And context. We made already this comment about context being critical. Magic, science, and religion within their particular contexts. So when created, by whom, for whom, what do they tell us about the world? Everything's context. Why do I keep banging away at this drum? Because we're going to see a lot of things that are ripped out of context. And ripping things out of context in a way is a powerful tool, because if you take something out of context, you can manipulate it to say whatever in the world you want. I like to think of the mystery of the dead cat. So you find a cat on the road. What killed it? Maybe a car. I don't know. It's on the road. I find the cat in a restaurant. What killed the cat? That's a little different. Now I'm looking for a cat collar in my food. You find a cat in the microwave. You get where we're going with this. The more information I give you, the more context I give you, the more chance you can determine what's going on. Isn't that why people watch, some of these crime dramas, Law and Order, and the crime procedurals? They love the context. They want to see what happened. How did we get there? How did this person wind up in 13 pieces in their living room and one part in the bathroom? Context, critical, but it makes things controversial. People with a vested interest in controlling you tend to decontextualize things, and they get very angry when you recontextualize them. So I want to introduce you to Arthur C. Clarke. Some of you already know him. He is a prominent science fiction author, admittedly one of my favorites. It's my course. I make the rules. Arthur C. Clarke, though, did a lot of science. He is credited with creating the modern communication satellite. Did that after World War II. You can see a writer, scientist, futurist, atheist. He identified as an atheist, but he liked Theravada Buddhism a lot. He lived in Sri Lanka. But a lot of his work is trying to determine good science from bad science, pseudoscience. Well, we're going to be reckoning with that too. When you're dealing with religion, magic, and science, you're going to get pseudoscience. But religion fascinates him. Clarke was not dismissive of religion. He didn't hate it. He didn't think you were stupid for being religious. That was not the way he operated. But he often thought that preachers, ministers were stupid because they were just trying to manipulate you and get your money, and they weren't honest with you about it. We're going to deal with Clarke's 3 laws, something he came up with over a decade, and in particular, that 3rd law is interesting. Now, you can read them for yourselves. The 3rd law, though, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. That's worth keeping in the back of your mind. Another reason that magic's difficult to define. I mean, it shows up in movies a lot, and it's a great comic motif, but it's a fact too. You walk into a culture where they've never seen a television before, and suddenly you bring out a portable television and there's a person talking on it. What are these people supposed to think? You can laugh at them and say how stupid they are, but they've never seen it before. They think there's a person inside the box. They think it's magic. You've captured a soul, which is what many people thought about photography in the beginning. Again, we laugh at this because we understand it, but what if we didn't? Well, take that to other things. What we automatically assume is a miracle from God or magic or some sort of alien interference. Hey, it's not just some sort of technology that you don't understand right now. Another voice we're going to be hearing a lot from in this course, Carl Sagan. He was, as you can see, an astronomer, agnostic, exobiologist, worked on the Voyager missions to the planets. He dealt a lot with scientific literacy. He was a great popularizer of science. He was also a scientist who contributed to the field, but he did a lot of popularizing of science, so much so that he was actually denied tenure at Harvard. A lot of his colleagues were jealous of him. Well, he also works a lot on combating pseudoscience. He's going to try to get people to understand that not everything is equally valid. You need to be very critical, very scientific, be skeptical about things. If it's a real concern, great, we should investigate it. But if it's obviously bogus, we shouldn't waste time with it. So we're going to be looking at pseudoscience, and here you go. Some of the ways you can define a pseudoscience. Again, I'll let you read through these. But I just want you to, when you're going through these, think about this. Because the fact is, in this course, we're going to be looking at some things that are, I would say, pseudoscience by accident, where the people honestly thought they were doing, good work and they didn't really, as opposed to deliberate frauds. And we will see some of those. And all of this will be in the science, magic, and, religion category. And just so you know, cognitive dissonance, wouldn't be fair if I didn't mention this. Studying anything in context, right? Science or religion or a religious text can cause hostility in some people. As a religious studies person, I often teach Old and New Testaments, but I'm teaching them in the context of the Roman, Egyptian, Hebrew times. I also deal a lot in textual criticism, where you can see the sources for these things. You can watch the evolution of the Hebrew God from various Canaanite deities or, South Semitic deities. And people just get incredibly angry. I can't tell you the hate mail I've received over the years from students who let me know that they want me to burn in hell, or they want me fired because how dare I say that about the Bible or something. All I'm doing is putting it in context. I'm not trying to change what you believe. I'm not interested in whatever your religion is, changing you to something else or out of it, whatever. But I am interested in doing my job. And my job is to present all options to you, to explain many things. To do that, I'm going to have to put things in context. That's not always going to be comfortable. So in this course, it's entirely possible that each and every one of you is going to find something that hits you the wrong way. No, guess what? In my education, I had a lot of things rub me the wrong way too. You're not alone, and I get it. Individuals who hold two or more contradictory beliefs can experience this. Defensiveness, aggression, I see this all the time. So just be ready. It's possible I'm going to say something that contradicts what you've learned. All right, that is our introduction. That is our lesson 1. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next lesson.